Just a couple weeks ago, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, in advance of the verdict in the Daniel Penny case, had this to say in local media.
You should look at that on a multi-faceted approach of everything that's wrong with the system that we're facing. One, look at the photo that they used to show the victims. It seemed like it was a young, innocent child who was brutally murdered, and it gave that impression. When you looked at the photo that was being used, it wanted to set up in the minds of people that we were dealing with a young, innocent child that, just a Michael Jackson intimidator that, was just brutally assaulted. Then you look at the complete failure of our mental health system, a complete failure from the days of closing psychiatric wards and having those who needed help just turned over into the street without giving any safety net to accept them. Parents reach out to me all the time and say, I'm watching my child go down, or my loved one, my family member going down this serious decline. What do we do? A system where you brought people into hospitals, gave them medicine for one day, and sent them back. The young man in this case was going within our system, throughout the revolving door of our system. Now, we're on the subway where we're hearing someone talking about hurting people, killing people. You have someone on that subway who was responding, doing what we should have done as a city and a state of having a mental health facility. Those passengers were afraid. I'm hoping that the juries are...
Mm-hmm. And he essentially went on to say he's hoping that the jury keeps this in mind. He didn't want a jury verdict that would discourage Good Samaritans like Daniel Penny, and then there's the system issues to address, aren't there? What do we get from Jordan Neely's side of the equation? Racial politics. Jordan Neely's father and his legal representation. Sidewalk presser after the verdict yesterday. Here's Dad.
I just want to say I miss my son. My son didn't have to go through this. I didn't have to go through this either. It hurts. Really, really hurts. What are we going to do, people? What's going to happen to us now? I had enough of this. System is rigged. Mm-hmm. Come on, people. Let's do something about this.
If the system is rigged in any fashion, it's against the law-abiding, it would seem, Mr. Zachary, wouldn't you say, when somebody who's been arrested 40 times is still on the streets? And if they are paranoid schizophrenic and they have a mental health issue, is not getting the treatment that he needs, that taxpayers pay for?
I mean, he was on a list of the 50 most mentally ill in New York City. So why didn't New York City officials take that list and try and help those people?
Was he above or below Alvin Bragg on that list? Dante Mills is Dad's legal representation, and he offered this very stilted version of the events of that day between Penny and Jordan Neely. Of course he did, like a good trial lawyer does.
There's too often this is happening where we're left alone in this society. We got to stop that. We have to change how we impact each other. Jordan came on that subway car. The first thing he asked for was food, and he was killed. And the person who killed him was not held responsible. We cannot allow this to keep happening.
Well, of course, that's a preposterous caricature of what happened on that day, but that's what you have to do when you don't want to talk about some of the issues that Eric Adams raised. And you don't want to talk about, frankly, what you did or didn't do, Dad, for your son, those many years, right? Mm-hmm. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by Professor William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell, founder of LegalInsurrection.com, president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back on.
Your reaction to the jury verdict and Alvin Bragg sort of perhaps getting hoisted by his own petard, including the lesser charge of criminally negligent homicide, and the jury making quick work of that. He thought that was going to be his backstop.
Yes, obviously the result is good. How we got here is not good, and that's the problem with the whole case, is how we got here is really a political prosecution, gave into pressure. There were activist groups, many of whom were outside the courthouse up until the very end, that put pressure on the DA's office. And, of course, Alvin Bragg probably would have been inclined to push it anyway. So it ended well, but a very ugly, very negative prosecution for society, because what it says is if you're on a subway or you're someplace and you see somebody being threatened, walk away. And we always say to each other, why didn't anybody help her? Why didn't anybody intervene? Why didn't anybody come to the assistance of this crime victim? Well, now we know why. Because the Alvin Braggs of the world, for political reasons, for ideological reasons, have made it clear that if you come to the aid of somebody who's about to be assaulted, you might be the one prosecuted.
What were your thoughts when last Friday, when the judge dropped that more serious charge against him, and then told the jury to go home and try to relax and keep your mind off of this case? I mean, were they trying to bend the law to try and squeeze a guilty verdict?
I don't know. I think the prosecution certainly was. That the prosecution thought that what they didn't want was a mistrial. They want to have to do the whole case over again, so they thought they would get lucky on the lesser charge. Whether the judge should have allowed it or not, I mean, I've read accounts. I haven't researched it myself, but I've read accounts from responsible people that under New York law, he should have declared a mistrial, not allowed the charges to be dropped, because they were being dropped for that strategic reason. That seemed improper. I can't give bad motives to the judge, but I do give bad motives to the prosecutors who wanted a conviction of something, of anything. And but the fact that it hung on Friday was an indication that they might have problems even getting a conviction on the lesser charge, although I didn't expect them to come back in less than an hour, basically, with a not guilty. I figured it'd be another hung jury there.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, in these matters, the jurors don't live in a bubble. And I think over the weekend, I'm sure some of them, I mean, they had to already have wind of the international import of this case and the coverage of it, and then the commentary subsequently, combined with probably at least a couple of holdouts that were going to be stalwart. And by the time Monday rolls around, they're just done with it because they know, there's no moving some of those jurors, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine in the jury room, I don't know what it was, whether there was one holdout or two. You never know what people say is true or not. I've heard there was one who was a particular holdout, walks in Monday morning and looks at 11 fellow jurors, and they say, we're not budging. You want to be here for the whole week? We'll do it, but we're not budging. And that holdout says, well, what's the point now? And so that could be what happened. Those jury dynamics, you never really know. Mm-hmm. But, we've all seen the movies about jurors, and I've never actually served on a jury, so I haven't been in the room. But those personal dynamics have to play a part.
Well, it's interesting, too, that some of the questions we talked about earlier in the show, some of the questions that we know the jurors asked over their several days of deliberation, wanting, and it's all legitimate, wanting to a clarification on the justified use of force, wanting to see some of the videos again to refresh what they had previously seen, and also the testimony of the prosecution's expert, the city medical examiner, who concluded that the cause of death was the restraint hold that Daniel Penny put on Jordan Neely. And then, of course, the defense had their own pathologist to say, no, that wasn't the proximate cause of death. But ultimately, they had to not believe the medical examiner that the prosecution put up, and maybe we'll get some indication. Maybe they just didn't believe that this case, like we've been discussing, should have been brought in the first place, and they, and then the defense expert helped give them that reasonable doubt they needed to make the conclusions they did.
Right. I mean, the instructions under New York law had to do with, how a reasonable person would apply force in that situation. And, on the video and also from the, testimony of witnesses, people on the train, he was extremely threatening. He was making statements like, I don't care if I die, things like that. And you're in an enclosed subway car, so there's no place for people to run, at least not initially. And so you take it all into account, and are they going to say it was unlawful to restrain him? No, I don't even think the prosecution claimed that. This was very much like the prosecution of Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd case. The issue was not so much that Chauvin took him to the ground, and the issue was not so much that he was initially restrained on the ground. The issue was you held it too long.
Yeah.
And I always found that, and that's what the claim was here. You held, the Daniel Penny held the guy too long.
But what's the rule? I mean, but we learned in court through, witness testimony and even the NYPD officers that he still had a pulse when they got on that train, but they refused to perform CPR, at least mouth to mouth, because they said he was dirty and he could have had hepatitis or AIDS. So doesn't that prove that he, Daniel Penny wasn't fully responsible for his death?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point, which is that when the police arrived, he was alive.
Right.
And the police refused to resuscitate him. And, I don't know if you can blame them. Would you want to do mouth-to-mouth on somebody who, appears to be, ill, appears to be, have problems? And maybe if they had done that. Now, I don't know legally if there was an instruction to the jury on, like, a subsequent intervening cause, but had they rendered medical care to him like they would in a normal case, he might still be alive. And, so you're going to convict somebody of homicide where it was really the police's failure to lend assistance, medical assistance, that arguably caused the death.
The other side of the justice system that we don't talk about enough, civil justice system. I mean, this wrongful death suit that Jordan Neely's father is filing against Daniel Penny. I mean, just generally speaking, what is your perspective on all of these frivolous suits filed by these bottom-feeding plaintiffs' attorneys? I think you can sense where I'm coming from. With respect to a situation like this, because, of course, the evidentiary standard is different. It's preponderance, not reasonable doubt in the civil justice system. And if this case is allowed to go forward despite the acquittal, then there's no saying that a Manhattan grand jury won't say, give the family some money coming out of Daniel Penny's pocket. This is not a rich man. So I mean, so there's still that possibility of illicit punishment in a sense of Daniel Penny.
That's true, and I would not be surprised if you saw some suit against the city for the police failure to, render assistance. That's in every one of these cases. I'm glad to see that Ben Crump isn't in this one, because he's the one who really paved the way of private attorneys getting involved, running a publicity campaign. I mean, Trayvon Martin case and Michael Brown, but really the Trayvon Martin case is where this territory was explored, and where, immediately after the shooting of Trayvon Martin, the PR team for the family, the family's lawyers put together a PR team, started circulating photos of Trayvon Martin looking like he was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And those are the photos everybody remembers. They were first out of the door. There is a systematized process here for the attorneys who practice in this area, and much of it is public relations, to create a perception in the public mind of an injustice having taken place. And we covered the Trayvon Martin case extremely carefully at the time, And, when photos of him as what he looked like at that time came out from his cell phone and other things, which I don't think the jury ever saw. This was not the little 12-year-old in the photo that the public saw. This was a very robust, muscular sort of person. But everybody has in the mind that Trayvon Martin was just a kid who went to the 7-Eleven to get Skittles, and the rest is history. And there was a lot more to it. So the attorneys involved in these things make a fortune. I assume they take these cases on contingent fee, and there have been 7- and 8-figure settlements with cities in these sort of cases. Now, in some cases, it might be justified, but my point is there's a system that immediately kicks into place when you have a potentially racially divisive case. And there are attorneys who are very adept at manipulating public perception and, setting this all up ultimately for the civil suit where they're going to clean up.
What do you think that this?
But what should be done about that in terms of tightening up the civil justice system? I mean, this is happening in this case too, because as Eric Adams predicted, that's exactly what ABC did yesterday. It's the picture of Jordan Neely in his Michael Jackson costume and doing the moonwalk, and he seems like, he's a nice young man who's got a passion for dancing. Well, that's not the Jordan Neely that showed up on that subway that Daniel Penny was on, as we all know. But there has to be some sort of propriety with respect to the presentation of the facts in a court of law, one would think.
Well, that's why you have a trial, but unfortunately, that means you're going to trial. That's the problem, and most people who are in that situation don't have the resources to hire counsel in a civil suit because defense counsel in a civil suit can't take it on contingency fee. You've got to pay them because they're not going to win anything. The most they're going to do is save you from losing. And so it's a real disparity. I don't know how you solve the system.
Loser pays.
Loser pays could be part of it. I think so. Maybe we have to go to that. As somebody who, before joining Cornell, was a plaintiff's lawyer, a plaintiff's contingency fee lawyer, that would have an extremely chilling effect. Maybe we're at the point where we've got to do that, but that would have a chilling effect on people who have legitimate cases, but fear bringing the case could bankrupt them financially. So I don't know what the answer is to that. Perhaps it's to get a more honest media that doesn't get played this way, that points out, hey, this photo of Trayvon Martin looks like it was taken 8 years ago, but you don't get that from the media. And if you remember, in the Trayvon case, NBC News actually doctored the 911 tape to make it seem like George Zimmerman had racial motivations. They literally doctored it. Mm-hmm. They cut parts out of it. And maybe if we had a more honest media, and I think that helped Daniel Penny here. I mean, I think the rise of X, formerly Twitter, the able to raise money for his defense. I mean, he raised $2 million for his defense, and he may have spent most of that. Okay,
right.
I mean, he had a really top-notch defense team. If you don't have that, you can get steamrolled very easily in the system.
Well, what do you think?
Well, the other thing, though, too, is, the media, yes, true. But how about the trial bar? How about a little policing of these hustlers like Benjamin Crump you mentioned? How about some sanctioning of the attorneys to send a chilling effect to not be a race-hustling demagogue who basically obliterates the canons in pursuit of jackpot justice? Making an example of one or two of those guys, and maybe you wouldn't have to go to loser pays.
Except that's never going to happen. I mean,
okay,
that's
but
never going to happen.
Neither is an honest media.
Trial lawyers, and again, I'm a former, plaintiff's contingency fee lawyer in the securities area, not personal injury. They basically control the bar associations, and they're never going to allow something like that to happen. So this is a problem. I wish I had the answer to it, but to the private practice lawyers who swoop in these cases, whip up the public, create racial disputes where there was none before in the public perception, and then cash in. I'm not sure how you stop it, except maybe somebody like Daniel Penny needs to sue the lawyers who are coming after him.
I like it.
Well,
Yeah.
what does this mean?
Yeah.
Staying on the courthouse steps isn't privileged.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
does this verdict mean for Soros-backed prosecutors across this country? And there are some lawmakers that are calling on DA Bragg to resign, but I don't think he's going to willingly go.
I mean, these are elected officials. George Soros, in his evil genius, found a weakness in our society, as he has done throughout his life, finding weaknesses in society and exploiting them. And the weakness he focused on when nobody was watching were local prosecutors' offices. Local prosecutors' offices went after Donald Trump, went after Daniel Penny, and they have, from civil suit, they have close to, if not absolute immunity. You can't sue Alvin Bragg or that hideous woman prosecutor, for doing the job, even if they do the job, corruptly. Now, whether they violated the law, criminal law is a different story. And I hope our Department of Justice will create a task force to investigate these various abuses in the name of politics that we've seen and find out whether any laws were broken. I mean, Bragg bended and extended the law in highly unusual ways to try to get Donald Trump on time-lapsed bookkeeping, charges and convert them under a crazy theory to criminal law felonies so he could prosecute them. I mean, I hope the federal government's going to look at Alvin Bragg's conduct and apply the same standard. Only charge him if you think you can prove your crime. But maybe there are innovative ways of applying the law to these prosecutors who bring cases for political purposes. I'm not sure the Daniel Penny case is one of those, but I think the Donald Trump case is, where you have somebody running for DA who says, I'll be the one to get Donald Trump. Okay? That's pretty bad. So I hope the Department of Justice will apply the same level of scrutiny to these Soros prosecutors as the Soros prosecutors have applied to many innocent people.
William Jacobson is clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell, also the founder of legalinsurrection.com and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation and the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thank you as always.
Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Pensions and all things Illinois policy related. Ted Dabrowski, 737.
But now let's head into that newsroom once again. Here's Mike Scott.
32 degrees at 7:31 on AM 560.